We are all upset today because Kevin McCarthy, on the verge of power, the verge of replacing John Boehner as Speaker of the House, told the truth about these committees going after Hillary Clinton on Benghazi. He said, and this is unbelievable that he actually admitted this, he said, everybody thought Hillary Clinton was unbeatable, right? But we put together a Benghazi special committee, a select committee. What are her numbers today? Her numbers are dropping because she's untrustable. But no one would have known that had we not fought to make that happen. What a disgrace. On the line right now to put this in perspective is David Brock, the founder of Media Matters. David, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
This is amazing that he was, I don't know if foolish enough or brazen enough to come out and say this. What is your reaction?
Well, I think, one, it's hardly a revelation to those who have been following closely what's been going on with the Benghazi Committee and Gowdy, the chair of the committee. Long ago, I mean, really from the time she left office as Secretary of State, they pivoted to Hillary Clinton and tried to discredit her and tar her record and tarnish her all the way through. So it's not a revelation. It is a gift. I guess it's a gaffe, which is usually defined as a politician caught telling the truth. And maybe he thought he was in the Fox News bubble when he said it. But, you know, people like us watch Fox News, so you don't have to. And obviously the quote was caught. And it is astounding and very, very revealing. And I think it's an abuse of Congress. It's abuse of taxpayer money. American Democracy Legal Fund, one of the groups that I run, filed an ethics complaint in the House this afternoon against the committee. And I think the Republicans should really seriously rethink what they're doing with Kevin McCarthy. Now, they're not going to take my advice. But, you know, this was just unbelievably boneheaded on his part.
Do you think they'll have second thoughts about him?
Well, I don't know. I mean, in his first time out, he tripped over himself. So, you know, I mean, my view of him has always been kind of an empty suit. This proves that. And really, you know, the office of Speaker of the House not just represent one party. You know, it was really a disgrace to go on national television and say that. And so maybe he should rethink things as well. Yeah,
he's kind of an extremist. He was also part of the cloakroom conspiracy, tried to undermine Obama from day one. So
That's right.
So this is somebody unfit for office.
From the beginning had that strategy. That's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, he from the very beginning, he's been about obstructionism. He's been about extremism. He's about conspiring for politics at the expense of this country.
Right. I mean, anybody who thinks that this is a real change in the direction of Congress, he's likely to be a weaker speaker than John Boehner. And, you know, remember, Eric Cantor is the one who really should be ascending to the speakership, but the crazies in that party primaried him, and you see where he ended up. And so the caucus is really hostage to 40 or 50 members who, you know, it's hard to imagine more extreme than McCarthy and Boehner, but really are radicals.
Yeah,
so I don't anticipate any change in the gridlock. And it's clear now where the dysfunction in Washington lays. It's in the Republican caucus in the House.
Yeah, I mean, the only difference is maybe less drinks. It's a speaker without the speakeasy. I mean, that's probably the only change I see. You were at the beginning with Republicans, and you wrote a book, Blinded by the Right. And I loved your book, by the way. Excellent book. And they were crazy back then. I could never have imagined they were going to go downhill even more and further off the rails. And yet, doesn't it seem they have? Are you surprised that they've even gone further? I don't even call it right. I would just say further crazy.
Yes, I am surprised. You know, I often think that I'm glad I got out when I got out, which was in the late 1990s. And, you know, I was involved in what was correctly called a vast right-wing conspiracy, but it was a small ragtag operation that had a little money behind it. You know, they were trying to essentially overthrow the government. They failed at that. But today, it's entirely different. I mean, it's much better financed, it's more sophisticated, and it is closer to the fringe than ever before.
It seems that the two factors that have made the right even more dangerous, number one, the marriage with the religious right, Jerry Falwell in 1979 in the moral majority, which has they've gotten deeper in there, and that's why they deny a lot of science. And the other is the unlimited money in the system, which allows people like the Koch brothers to dominate, because if money is speech, those with more money can speak more, and it drowns out everybody else. Those are the two factors. And also, again, denying science. With the religious right, it's denying science on social issues. And the Koch brothers, they don't want regulation, so they're denying science on climate change, for example.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In this new book I have out called Killing the Messenger, I have a whole section that kind of updates you from the vast right-wing conspiracy to what is now a vast right-wing conglomerate. And a lot of it is centered on the Koch brothers and their financial network, and the fact that they have self-interest. They have a lot to gain financially from the agenda they're pushing, and it is a radical agenda that Americans don't support, and it's terrible for America's families. And I think you're absolutely right. The marriage with the hard evangelical right. What's going on here is there's a lot of anger in the Republican Party because the country is actually becoming somewhat more liberal. And you look at some of the Supreme Court decisions and other things that are going on that President Obama has successfully put through. They're really, really angry. That's what's fueling these insurgent candidates in the Republican primaries for president.
And I mentioned some good news earlier. Even after they've thrown everything against the wall in terms of Planned Parenthood, 65% of Americans want to support Planned Parenthood with federal funds, according to a USA Today poll that was in their paper this morning. And what I'm hoping, though, in terms of this whole Benghazi revelation from Kevin McCarthy, this gaffe, is that the media finally has the gumption to go after these Republicans and stop following their talking points ad nauseum without thinking, attacking her, and maybe start going after these Republicans for trying to undermine, quite frankly, the country and her campaign. Do you think this will give them the impetus to start doing their jobs and stop following Fox News talking points?
Well, I certainly hope so. But, on the record, there's not a lot of grounds for hope, because this Benghazi committee has used and manipulated the mainstream media all the way through. And, virtually every leak that they've put out has ended up being totally false, totally wrong, and blowing up in the news outlet's face. And yet it still goes on. They're still leaking, which is totally inappropriate as far as the process goes. The New York Times had allegations of criminal misconduct against Hillary Clinton 3 times in the last few months, all of them totally wrong, planted by this committee. So I hope it's time for the media to wake up and see that the emperor has no clothes here.
The New York Times is still the best paper in the country. How are they getting this so wrong, David?
Well, it is the best paper, and it's the gold standard, and this is why the Republican strategy of using the New York Times is so, in my view, brilliant, because it's counterintuitive. You'd never expect it. It's a paper that has a liberal editorial line. But let's not forget, this is the paper that wrote the Whitewater story in 1992 against Bill Clinton. That was planted in the Times by Republican enemies of Clinton from Arkansas. And, institutions get mindsets, and I believe the New York Times has a mindset about the Clintons from all the fake scandals they pursued in the 1990s unsuccessfully, and they're still looking for that silver bullet. They haven't found it. It's not there, but, they've got this vendetta going.
And we also remember from the New York Times the yellow cake uranium story with Judith Miller, I think, that helped us get into Iraq. So, I mean, they are the gold standard, but sometimes they buy pyrite, end up with fool's gold.
That's right.
And it becomes a problem because people, as you pointed out, say that's the New York Times. It must be right. This email situation has dominated the news. It has made it virtually impossible for Hillary Clinton to get her message out. She said that she made a mistake, which politically, obviously, that was a case because it's dominated the campaign. But in reality, this is really minor. Can you put in the big picture, a larger perspective, what is the email situation and what does it really mean?
Yeah, so I think, you're absolutely right that one of the effects has been, we looked at New York Times coverage, for example, in the last 30 days. of every Clinton story, 70% were about email and 30% were about everything else. And of course, the everything else is all the issues, the important issues that are critical for families and children that Hillary is out there talking about that gets no coverage. So that's a problem, and it's a problem for her that, in cutting through the clutter. But I do feel that we're starting to turn a page. As you said, the secretary gave interviews. She took responsibility for her part in this. What I'm waiting for is for other people to take responsibility. The New York Times, the Benghazi committee that's now morphed into the committee to investigate Hillary Clinton's emails. And the real game now that they're playing is they're trying to get into her personal email. That's where they're going with this. And again, that whitewater analogy is very apt because you start investigating one thing and then it metastasizes and morphs into everything else. But I do think the page is starting to turn. The more people see what's in the emails, they're totally benign. They're about wanting skim milk in her tea and telling aides to pack warm socks. And the final thing is, a couple weeks ago, it gets no media coverage, but the Department of Justice in a lawsuit made a legal filing and a legal determination that the use of the personal email, the separation of the work and personal email by Hillary without supervision, that's the right of every government employee, and the deletion of the personal email was all proper, appropriate, and totally legal. But people don't know that because the media suppresses that story.
They certainly are. And you write a lot in your book, The Republican Noise Machine, about how a story with no there gets from a right-wing talking point and conspiratorial websites, and next thing you know, it's on the nightly news. For our listeners, explain how this process works, because you know better than anybody the methods of the far right and how they plant these stories, and next thing you know, we're all talking about it, even though it might be completely false.
Yeah, well, let's take Hillary as an example. There are, when she left office in the spring of 2013, 8 Republican organizations and super PACs were formed to try to dig up dirt on her when she hadn't even decided to run for president. Okay, and these groups are marketing this dirt. And, one example was this book, Clinton Cash, that came out a couple months ago, which I call Coke Cash, because the Cokes and their financial network were behind it. And so it surfaces in a book by a right-wing operative. And then it makes its way, that book will sell because it can be on Fox News 24/7, and you can go on virtually every radio station in the country and promote it. And then the noise gets so loud that the mainstream media is cowed into starting to cover it. And, it was mixed. Some outlets did the right thing and looked at the book really critically and put some scrutiny on it and said, hey, nothing here holds up. But again, the New York Times got used. They made a special deal with the author to promote that book, and they had a big story on, Hillary supposedly doing a favor for a foundation donor on the sale of a uranium company to Russia. And it turned out she had absolutely nothing to do with the sale. The State Department was only one of 9 federal agencies that approved it, and that blew up in the New York Times face. So that's the way it works. There's a kind of food chain that we talk about, where something is manufactured, the dirt is manufactured, and then there are constituencies in the media, not for partisan reasons or ideological, it's commercial. Other than Donald Trump, the Clintons sell. It's good for ratings. It's good for click-throughs. It's a cottage industry among book writers. So that's what this is.
David Brock from Media Matters, thank you so much for shedding some light and putting this situation in perspective. And you're also with Correct the Record. You got a lot of work to do because there's a lot of records being distorted when it comes to the Clintons.
Right. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you being on the Wayne Besen Show. I'll be back in just a moment.
The Wayne Besen Show.